can you describe what is your background in the Palestine movement? And along with that, why was it important for you to specifically take this up as an education worker?
I am, well, I mean, I've been supporting Palestine, the fighting for the freedom of Palestine for decades, and it in many different times, different arenas. I was trying to figure it out, but I think most consciously since 1967, which would put me at about 14 or 15 years old. And always have been, Palestine has been a very important issue, and an issue that I think it's important to bring into all of the other struggles. It's an issue that's often marginalized because it's a very difficult issue to tackle, because I would say up until recently, the Zionists have controlled sort of how you talk about it, and they've controlled the conversation. And I feel like at this point, because the incredible horrific crimes that Israel has been committing against the Palestinian people has changed the narrative and has made it easier for those of us who are both Jewish and not Jewish to criticize, not only criticize Israel, but condemn Israel for its genocide. And as an educator, to me, it's so important that students are part of the struggle. I mean, I know when I was in high school during the Vietnam War, no teacher would support. Anytime I asked about it, I was shot down and told I couldn't talk about it. And what does that have to do with education? And it has everything to do with education. It has everything to do with growing new leadership and teaching students, or helping students, assisting students take the leadership in terms of being involved in the movement for justice. And I think, in a sense, Trump and the policies of the federal government have done a lot of the organizing for us, because there's lots of young people who are just really want to know what's going on and want to be involved in stopping it, whether it be Palestine, whether it be fighting ICE, whether it be anti-police, terror actions against the terrorism of the police. There are so many things that young people want to be involved in. And as teachers, it's important that we not censor what's going on in the world and try to involve them as much as possible. Now, just as an aside, I'm a Jewish person. I was raised not as a religious Jew, but as a secular Jew who was taught at a very early age that Judaism is about fighting for social justice. And so, as an educator, and as a Jewish educator, and every time a Jewish educator, or anytime any educator talks about Palestine, and of course, because anti-Semitism has been so weaponized by the genocide deniers, the Zionists. It's almost not enough to call them Zionists. It's like, that's not strong enough. To me, it's important to constantly, as a Jew, to speak out against what's going on in Palestine to my siblings in Palestine.
Wow. I feel like we could have a whole interview just about your history of activism since your early years. And obviously the hook to this interview is the organizing that you were involved with the NEA
Yes.
convention, and to cut ties with the ADL. I was just torturing myself a little bit listening to the New York Times interview with the president of the ADL right before this.
We really offended them, didn't we?
So I just to kind of transition into that, what was the purpose behind this this vote? Maybe you could give a little bit of background on the ADL, its ties to public to schools in general, and yeah, just speak to some of the hesitations or the excitements or how members reacted when you started organizing and how this developed over time.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me just say that I presented it on the floor of the NEA. I was the one who moved it, moved NBI 39, which was drop the ADL, but I didn't write it. And I was not part. I actually am new to Educators for Palestine. I've been very active on a local level with OEA for Palestine, Oakland Education Association for Palestine, and also a group called Bay Area Labor for Palestine. But I hadn't dabbled at all on a national level with the NEA, except to know, what their positions have been in the past and things like that. I mean, the resolution was very straightforward and very simple. And again, I didn't write it, just said that the NEA will cut all ties to the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, that it's not a social justice organization. The ADL has for years masqueraded as a civil rights organization. But if you dig deep, not even have to dig that far, you can see all of the crimes that they have committed against our movements, and not just against the Free Palestine movement, but against the Black movement and the indigenous community. They have spoken out. They spoke out against Black Lives Matter. They said, please, don't stop doing that. You're making too much of a fuss. They have not embraced. I mean, they have not embraced, for example, DEI, which, you could say there's lots of problems with DEI. That's not, but they have not embraced anti-racist teachings. And that's a big problem. And they're a free curriculum. So a lot of teachers look at it and go, oh, Anti-Defamation League, stop hate, that this is great. I'm going to use it in my classroom. But they very clearly define anti-Semitism as criticism, anyone who criticizes Israel. And they're part of that same movement. In fact, they're part of they have been involved in some, and not only the doxing and the harassment of both Jewish educators and other people who are not Jewish who dare to speak out against Israel, but they've also been responsible for providing names to some of the investigative committees who have been the people who, for example, in the California, in the East Bay, over the past 2 or 3 years, there have been federal investigations, and the ADL has been part of providing names, providing information to the feds. And this is, at this point, it's pretty scary about anyone who provides anything to the feds, because it's going to be used for deportations, or it's going to be handed over to ICE, or so they're not, and even, I mean, I will say, and I'll stop, because I mean, people can find this out. There's a great article in Rethinking Schools about the ADL. There was a petition that was signed by over 300 organizations about 5-6 years ago, entitled "Drop the ADL." And if you even go to Wikipedia, and you can argue, well, Wikipedia, it's a, is it how Wikipedia basically says that the ADL is no longer a social justice organization because of its history in the movement. So yeah, so to us, it was important to take this stand. I was in the meeting where it was raised, it was discussed that we were going to raise this NBI, and honestly, I mean, nobody else volunteered to raise it. So I said, okay. I didn't realize what, I mean, I knew it was would cause a commotion, but I didn't know it was going to cause as much of a commotion as it did. Because just so people know, first of all, it was NBI, new business item number 39, but they didn't go in order in the NEA. They put things in buckets. So this was put into some random bucket at the very end of the convention. Last year, Educators for Palestine and some of the Arab American members who hadn't yet, I think, formed a caucus. Now there is the Middle East North African, or the MENA caucus. But all of their items were put in the bucket for the last day. All of the, and there were a lot of them, fighting fighting the characterization of criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism and all these different things. They were put in for the last day. Well, what happened at that convention last year is the NEA workers went on strike. And so they never got to several of the last buckets. The conference ended. And Educators for Palestine walked the picket lines. But we think that the NEA leadership knew that this was going to happen, that they planned, because they don't want to deal. This is too hot an issue. They can deal, they talk ad nauseum about DEI, and they also talk about, protecting transgender youth. All of this is good, but they are part of the Palestine exception movement, that unless they're pushed, and they have been pushed, they did pass a resolution about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, with other labor unions about supporting an arms embargo against Israel, but they haven't done anything about it. We haven't, we have nothing to show for it. And about 6 or 7 national unions did that. But this year, I was worried that it wouldn't even come up because they put it on the last day. And so the very last day of the convention, early in the morning, I was called into the back room to speak to a member of the executive committee who urged me to withdraw the NBI, said this is going to cause irreparable harm to the NEA. Please withdraw it. And I said, well, we really want this debated on the floor. I don't want to withdraw it. And then they said, well, how about, could you refer it to to a committee, and then it can come back again some other day, or maybe next year, or maybe never. I said, no. And then the third option was, well, if you like, you could announce it, you could read it on the floor, but then we won't discuss it. We won't vote on it. I said, no, that's not good either. So this actually happened twice before I actually got to move it onto the floor. I was called in another time, and they asked me the same. We went through the same stuff, and I said, look, we want it voted on the, we don't know if we're going to win or lose, but it's an important discussion to have. And really, I think the political point of the NBI is pretty clear, but I think part of it was just also, we wanted to alert the thousands of teachers, the tens of thousands of teachers who might think that this is a good curriculum to use. So we wanted to, we definitely wanted to speak truth to what was going on. So when it came up on the floor, when I got up to move the motion, before I even opened my mouth, President Pringle said, I just want you to know that we consider this a boycott, that the motion is calling for a boycott. And this is a problem because, every union unfortunately, has their hands tied. They can't call for a boycott. But the wording of the resolution had nothing to do. I said, President Pringle, please find the word boycott in the resolution. It doesn't exist. We're not calling for a boycott. We want the NEA to take a political stand against this organization, which has created great harm for many different progressive communities, and seems to be sort of a tool that is being used by the right wing at this point. She said, well, if it's passed, we're going to have to put it in an executive committee because it's a boycott. So that is what happened. On the floor, we had to take actually sort of 3 votes. The first vote was just an aye or nay, and you couldn't tell. And then the second vote, I thought it was clear, but they had everyone stand up and wave their programs. And I thought it was pretty clear, but there were some loud nays. So they did a third vote. And they have all these camera. I mean, it's like this big convention hall, you know, it's like I was in the front of the room, but President Pringle was like 2 blocks away. That's how far, that's how big the room was. And so after it did pass, she said it passed, but we're referring it to executive committee. And we didn't, honestly, I mean, we were elated. We were so elated that we passed it. But we didn't prepare for the backlash. We didn't prepare for the Zionist onslaught, which happened immediately. Immediately, everybody at the convention who wore a keffiyeh was doxxed, publicly doxxed on something called the K-12 tracker. They took pictures of people. The president of the Portland Association of Teachers was wearing a keffiyeh. We got a picture of her. We got pictures of other people, names where people taught, you know, and how we were so vicious, you know, we were so, I don't know, something about bringing the NBI was just such an attack on all of them. They also published, which was totally against the NEA rules, they recorded the resolution. They recorded my introduction. They recorded all of the conversation that happened on the floor before the vote was taken. And there's strict rules about you cannot record any, I guess those strict rules don't matter, but certainly not to the Zionists. But there were strict rules about recording, about videotaping people because of all of this. And they published it immediately. Like the next day, they published it in the K-12 extremism tracker. So anyway, yeah, I'm sorry, I've been talking and talking, but I think I answered the question. I mean, we just thought it was a very important political move. And we also, I will tell you that particularly for the veterans who have been in there for 10 years now trying to pass resolutions, they felt vindicated. They felt like that just the fact that we won I mean, yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mention that the leadership 2 weeks later basically nullified the vote on the technicality that it's calling for a boycott and they can't support calling for a boycott. But people just felt like that there was like a change in people's people's minds, and they felt like all of their work that they'd been doing for years to talk to people about supporting Palestine and the importance and the differentiation between anti-Semitism and support for Palestine or opposition to Israel really paid off. And I was amazed. I didn't think it was gonna. I thought it was going to be a failing resolution, but we weren't ready. We were not as prepared as we should have been for what happened after.
I mean, in a way, they kind of showed their playbook. I covered once attacks on teachers who have been organizing for Palestine in New Jersey, where I live, and this is what they're up against. And even high schoolers, children, will be doxxed and have their information shared by Zionists, by ADL types. And I maybe I'm being speculative, but I kind of like to think that if this same exact resolution had been written, but instead of referring to the ADL, it was referring to Moms for Liberty, it wouldn't have been considered a boycott. Like, I think that gets into the Palestine exception. So I really appreciate you laying out just the level of harassment that people received from Zionists. But I also, if you have thoughts, I feel like this gets into a larger question, and you've touched on this, of union democracy, of what's happening right at the level of rank and file teachers, and what's happening at the level of these supposed representatives. And yeah, essentially what to make of that and what to do about that. I know a lofty question, but if you have any thoughts, I think it's really posed by what went down.
Well, let me say first of all, if there were many resolutions that got amended during the week, and it was possible, to amend resolutions. And in some instances, the resolutions committee got back to the people who made the resolution and said, there's a problem with your resolution. If you want it passed, or if you want it to come to the floor, you're going to have to change this, this, and this. No one reached out to us. If someone from the resolutions committee had reached out to us and said, this might be interpreted as a boycott, we would have changed the wording a little bit. We would have tweaked it so that they wouldn't have that as an excuse. But they didn't. No one reached out to us. And by the time when Becky Pringle, the president, said that to me, it was too late to amend it. You have to amend it. They had rules. You had to amend it the night before by 8 o'clock in order to have it amended for the next day. So it was, in a lot of ways, it was a setup. And the bureaucracy of the NEA folded in together and 2 weeks later voted us out, voted against us. I don't know if anybody voted for it. I have no idea what the secret vote was, but it was incredibly demoralizing to a lot of people. But it really shows the difference. I mean, light years difference between the rank and file teachers and the leadership. And the leadership is so it's sort of scary because the Palestine exception, or the attacks on people who teach Palestine, and in Oakland we've had teachers not just doxxed but fired for differing levels. We had a teach in Oakland 2 months after October 7th about Palestine and supporting the resistance and all this, and teachers in elementary school, and we got the district just came down on us really hard, sent out threatening letters. If you're a teacher who's thinking of participating in the district, just know that this is against district policy and blah, blah, blah. And there will be repercussions. But the leadership, we're in right now, we're in pretty scary times in terms of, I mean, they virtually dissolved the Department of Education. They have leveled millions of dollars they've taken away grants from schools, and you see that the universities are falling all over themselves to trying to distance themselves from any progressive stance that they ever took. I mean, they're all falling in line, and I feel like NEA leadership had an opportunity not to fall in line, but they didn't do it. And they just accepted, they put out this whole thing about how they talked to Jewish groups and they talked to Arab groups, and was like, none of us can come up with any Arab groups that they talked to, nobody. And they certainly didn't talk to any anti-Zionist Jewish groups. They certainly didn't talk to JVP. They didn't talk to, If Not Now, they didn't talk to, there's plenty of caucuses of progressive Jewish educators. But instead, they just went to the same old washed up Zionist groups. And it does not bode well, because capitulating on Palestine means they're going to be capitulating on ICE raids. It means they're going to be even, Becky Pringle gave this resounding speech about how important DEI is. Will the NEA defend DEI when it comes down to it? I don't know, because a lot of schools are already folding. I just recently visited my daughter in DC, and I made sure to go visit one of my favorite museums, which is the National Museum of African American History, because I know it's on Trump's list. And who knows how long that museum is going to still be open, or before it's ethnically cleansed or racially cleansed by the Proud Boys. And this is what's happening. And unions have to take bold stands. I mean, certainly union members do, and that's what we do. I mean, in Oakland, we have a legal defense fund for students who are threatened by ICE. If they need lawyers, we're raising money for lawyers. We've had a campaign for police-free schools for years. So there's many things we're doing, and we're also trying, of course, to mobilize around the issue of Palestine.
Yeah. Oh, that brings up so many questions. I'm gonna try to like condense them, but you brought up so much, and I think like a lot of what you really said speaks to, the different positionality of the union leadership and the rank and file, who are really the ones who are taking the initiative and fighting for these issues that actually have kind of, yeah, this real urgency and reality. And at the same time, you mentioned that you wished that you'd been more prepared or collectively prepared for some of the repression. And it made me wonder, of course, like what could that look like in future fights? Like wh what could that like preparing and really building a base of rank and file solidarity look like? And also, you know, obviously some of on the one hand, it was a massive win, the fact that the resolution did pass, I forget the acronym, but it
NDI,
passed. Yeah,
NDI, yeah.
it passed. And but of course, it's really easy to be demoralized when it doesn't, there all those bureaucratic layers in place. So I'm wondering, like, what are some of the conclusions that you and other people that you're organizing with are taking to be able to kind of keep using this momentum to keep organizing against the fights ahead?
Well, let me say that we have only marginally been able to get back together to talk. It was easier being there. And we would meet every day, sometimes twice a day, to talk about everything that was going on. And now that we've been thrown to all parts, all areas of the country, it's a little harder. People have other things that they're doing. People also went on vacation, right after the convention, because it took a lot out of all of us. But I will say, and I think pretty much everyone agreed with this. So, for example, after it passed, we should have immediately come out with a press statement. We should have tried to ride that win publicly as long as we could, because we only had 2 weeks. We didn't know we had 2 weeks. I thought we at least had a few months myself, but we only had a couple of weeks. But if we had come out with an initial, so that's embarrassment, right? That creates a really embarrassing situation when you're so public about things for the NEA leadership. It just might have made it a little harder. It might have also made people understand what was going on. And then I think we did come out with a press statement after, but I think riding the win more loudly and more publicly would have been a smart thing to do. And this is all hindsight. I'm not blaming anybody. I blame myself before I blame anyone else. Because they immediately started the attack. All of a sudden, there were 300 organizations, Jewish organizations, who were up in arms about the past, the dropping the ADL. And they started calling the NEA and, threatening and doing all this stuff. And this is why the NEA didn't want it brought to the floor, because they didn't know how to handle this weaponization of anti-Semitism, phony claims for daring to take a stand against the Israeli genocide. I mean, anyway. So in terms of how we're moving forward, some people are passing resolutions in their local education associations. The Oregon Education Association passed a resolution. We haven't had, I just found out, unfortunately, at our first rep council meeting, they are not entertaining any resolutions. So it's going to have to wait till September. But we'll pass a resolution in the Oakland Education Association, basically supporting the passage of the resolution and criticizing the nullification, the anti-democratic move of the NEA leadership. And I just think we move forward, and we're thinking about next year and what we're going to be doing and what we're going to be doing in the meantime to sort of consolidate what it has definitely mobilized a lot of people. We're not as, it's a little bit, Chairman Mao had this in the early years, had this let 100 flowers bloom. Right now we have about 1,000 flowers blooming, which is very nice, but it's hard to organize with 1,000 flowers all over the place. So hopefully we can begin to pull it together and strategize and figure out, in a more concrete way how we can move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think a thing you touched on is that we're in this the movement certainly I think is starting to account for this question of yeah, actually repression can come really strong and really fast, and what does it mean to maintain our movement in the face of it? And of course you touched on that a bit. In a way, I think you talked about everything. At least I don't know about Emma, but at least all my questions for you were answered. But certainly, before we end the interview, if there's anything you think is important to mention that we haven't discussed, I certainly would want you to have the opportunity who has been in the movement for decades, as you said.
The only thing I can say is that teachers have a lot on their plate, right? We have, of course, the success, worrying about the success of our students, worrying about the safety of our immigrant students, of our Black students who are more likely to be suspended than just about any other population in a school. But I will say that I hope that teachers realize that besides this, because a lot of defense, we have a lot of defense that we're working on right now, but we also have to rise up on these very on the questions of Palestine. And there are a lot of educators that might say, well, what does this have to do with my school district and my students' success? And to me, it's quite clear. I mean, first of all, the students are really concerned about what's going on. They're busy, they're looking at it on TikTok, on Instagram. We have a very large Yemeni population here in Oakland, and they are very concerned. They're out all the time protesting. But also, and then we have Donald Trump basically withholding money to all of the schools, demanding action on, letting ICE in and different things that would supposedly restore the money. Just imagine if we could take the money, the billions that have been spent sending planes and Caterpillar tractors and all of the things that have been used to destroy Gaza and Palestine. If we could stop that war pipeline to Palestine, I mean, not to Palestine, to Israel, and then and use that money to basically rebuild and restore our cities, we would have a very different educational system. I mean, I'm sitting in a building that's over 100 years old that has no airflow whatsoever, And if you can open the windows, you get a little airflow, but not much. And they have no money. We have lead in the water in Oakland. And because we need the pipes changed. We need the pipes, they haven't been changed. So we got the old lead pipes and they don't have any money. But yet there's lots of money. The federal government, which just ended all the funding to public schools just about, has billions of dollars to spend to basically butcher and murder children and women and to fight to try to beat back the resistance movement in Palestine. So this is an education issue. It is more so an education issue than ever before. And I hope that people will figure out a way to be involved. If you're in New York City, there's a lot of opportunity to do that. It's just in some of the smaller towns where there isn't that much, but there's always ways. There's always divestment campaigns. There's, look at where are our pension funds being invested in? They're being invested in Caterpillar. They're being invested in Lockheed Martin or Boeing. This is what we have to change. All this pressure can only help in terms of trying to stop the war that the US and Israel are waging against Palestine.